leaving?
Goodbye.
Elena Cruz learned the true meaning of silence in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and loss, sitting in a plastic chair that dug into her back while the heart monitor beside her mother measured out the last fragile seconds of a life that had been nothing but sacrifice. Her mother Rosa lying so still beneath thin white sheets that Elena kept expecting her chest to rise again, to hear her voice say, "Baby, don't worry, I'm still here." But it never came, because the cancer had come fast and brutal, leaving no room for miracles, only goodbye. And Elena clutched her mother's hand, rough and calloused from decades of scrubbing office floors that were never hers, whispering through sobs that she wasn't ready, that she still needed her, that her baby needed its grandmother. But Rosa only smiled weakly, eyes still sharp, still full of the fierce love that had carried Elena through a lifetime of scarcity and dignity. And with the last of her strength, she pressed a small envelope into Elena's trembling palm and whispered, "Open this when you feel completely alone, when the world shows you exactly how cruel it can be, and remember who you are." Before her breathing hitched, the monitor screamed, and the room filled with nurses moving too quickly and too gently at the same time. And just like that, the woman who had been Elena's entire world was gone, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like it might crush her chest from the inside. And in that silence, Elena didn't hear her phone buzzing over and over on the chair beside her, didn't see the name Daniel flashing on the screen, didn't notice the messages stacking up asking if it was done yet, if she was coming home, because at that moment nothing existed except the unbearable truth that she was now alone in the world at 28 years old and 6 months pregnant, with no parents left and a future that suddenly felt like a dark hallway with no doors. And the next 24 hours passed in a blur of paperwork and condolences and hollow phrases from strangers who meant well but couldn't touch the depth of her grief. And by the time the funeral came, the rain was falling hard enough to soak through her black dress, the kind Rosa would have called too expensive and impractical. And Elena stood at the edge of the grave clutching a single white rose, her other hand instinctively resting on her belly, as if to protect the tiny life growing inside her from the weight of the moment. And Daniel stood beside her under a large umbrella angled carefully to shield himself while she got wet, checking his watch, shifting impatiently, sighing when the priest spoke too long. And when the casket was lowered into the ground, Elena felt something inside her break clean in half, because there was no coming back from this, no phone call she could make, no late-night visit to her mother's small apartment where Rosa would be waiting with soup and quiet understanding. And after the service, Daniel leaned close and whispered that he needed to leave early because he had an important meeting the next morning. Something about investors and timing, and Elena stared at him in disbelief, rain streaming down her face indistinguishable from tears, and asked how he could even think about work today of all days. But he only frowned, annoyed, and said life didn't stop just because people died. Words that landed like a slap so sharp she almost gasped, and she watched him walk away from her mother's grave, without looking back, already pulling out his phone, already elsewhere. And later that night, Elena sat alone in her childhood apartment surrounded by the modest life her mother had built, the mismatched furniture, the framed school photos, the old radio Rosa listened to while cooking, everything humming with memory. And she finally noticed the envelope still clutched in her hand, edges bent and damp from her sweat, but she couldn't bring herself to open it yet, because something told her once she did. There would be no going back, and before she could think further, her phone rang, Daniel's name lighting up the screen. His voice distracted and distant as he said he wouldn't be coming home, that he needed space, that everything felt like too much right now. And Elena felt a hollow open inside her chest as she whispered that her mother had just been buried today, that she didn't want to be alone. But he sighed and said this wasn't about her mom. This was about them, about how things had changed, about how he felt trapped and overwhelmed. And then he said the words she would replay in her mind for months afterward. "I can't do this anymore." Before hanging up, leaving Elena staring at her phone in stunned silence. And 3 days later, she saw him at a cafe downtown, laughing freely with a woman in heels and a tailored coat. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and glossy magazines, her hand resting familiarly on Daniel's arm. And Elena stood frozen. Across the street, her breath catching as the truth settled into place with sickening clarity, that while she had been holding her mother's hand as she died, Daniel had been building a new life without her, and she stumbled home, nausea rising, grief colliding with betrayal until she barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. And afterward she sat on the cold tile floor, one hand on her belly, the other finally tearing open the envelope Rosa had given her. And inside was a simple key taped to a folded letter written in her mother's careful handwriting, the words blurring as Elena read about a life she never knew existed, about a name Rosa had never spoken, Rosalind Mercado, heir to Mercado Logistics, a company Elena vaguely recognized from news headlines, worth billions, a fortune Rosa had walked away from decades ago for love, choosing a quiet life of cleaning offices over a gilded cage of expectations, managing the wealth in secret, growing it, protecting it, waiting for the right moment. And that moment, Rosa wrote, was now, because Elena was about to discover how quickly people showed their true faces when they thought you had nothing. And by the time Elena finished reading, she was shaking, her entire understanding of her life cracked wide open, because her mother, the woman who counted every dollar and mended old clothes, had been quietly wealthy beyond imagination, not because she wanted luxury, but because she wanted freedom and choice, and everything was now in Elena's name, locked in trusts, protected, untouchable, especially by Daniel. And Elena sat there until dawn, staring at the letter, listening to the city wake up, realizing that while the world thought she was a grieving, abandoned, pregnant woman with nothing left, the truth was far more complicated. And somewhere deep inside her grief, something new began to take shape, something steady and unbreakable, because for the first time she understood what her mother had meant all those years, when she said they were not small people, even when they lived small lives. And as the sun rose, Elena wiped her tears, placed the letter back into the envelope, and made a quiet promise to herself and to the child growing inside her, that she would survive this not by begging anyone to stay, not by chasing people who had already shown they were willing to leave, but by honoring the strength her mother had carried silently her entire life, unaware that in the weeks to come, Daniel's choices, made in arrogance and ignorance, would collide with the truth in a way that would change all of their lives forever. Elena moved through the next weeks like a ghost wearing a human body, attending doctor appointments alone, answering polite messages with rehearsed replies, and listening to Daniel's voicemails grow colder and more formal as he shifted from guilt to irritation to something that sounded disturbingly like relief, telling her they should talk logistics, that lawyers made things simpler, that he'd cover child support but didn't want complications. And Elena said nothing because grief had taught her something valuable, that silence often revealed more truth than words ever could. And while the world around her believed she was unraveling, a discarded woman clinging to survival, Elena was quietly doing exactly what her mother had taught her without ever saying it aloud. She was watching, learning, and waiting, because power, real power, never rushed. And one morning she walked into the downtown branch of Mercado National Bank holding the key her mother had left her hands steady, despite her pounding heart. And the moment she gave her name to the teller, the atmosphere shifted in a way she could feel in her bones. Whispers traveling behind glass walls, a manager appearing too quickly, addressing her as Ms. Mercado with a careful respect that made her stomach tighten. And inside a private room she was handed folders thick with documents that confirmed everything Rosa had written: companies, properties, holdings, trusts, numbers so large they didn't feel real. And the manager spoke softly, as if loud words might disturb the weight of the truth, explaining that everything had already been prepared, that the legal structure was ironclad, that no spouse, present or future, could access the assets without her explicit consent. And Elena nodded through it all, her mind replaying every moment Daniel had dismissed her worries, every time he'd hinted she was holding him back, every complaint about money, about timing, about responsibility. And she realized with a strange calm that his love had always been conditional on convenience, and once inconvenience arrived in the form of grief and pregnancy, he'd already been gone. And when Daniel officially filed for separation 2 weeks later, Elena signed the papers without hesitation, without negotiation, without revealing a single truth he did not deserve to know. And he mistook her compliance for weakness, texting her that he appreciated how mature she was being, that he never wanted to hurt her, that he hoped she'd be okay. And Elena deleted the messages without replying, because the woman he thought he was leaving behind no longer existed. And while Daniel began posting pictures online with Vanessa, the polished woman from the cafe whose ambition glittered as brightly as her jewelry, Elena was quietly meeting with attorneys and advisors, learning about boards and foundations and philanthropic leverage, discovering that her mother had already established the framework for something larger than wealth, a mission disguised as money, and Elena felt something shift inside her, grief slowly reshaping itself into purpose. And 3 months later, when Daniel married Vanessa in a small courthouse ceremony followed by a rooftop celebration full of champagne and congratulations, Elena watched the photos appear on her screen without flinching, one hand resting on her swollen belly, her daughter kicking as if reminding her that life was still moving forward. And she whispered thank you to her mother for the foresight to protect her from a man who would have drained her dry without ever understanding her value. And weeks after that, elegant invitations arrived across the city bearing the name Elena Mercado Cruz, announcing the inaugural gala of the Rosa Mercado Foundation, dedicated to supporting women navigating grief, abandonment, and financial vulnerability. And Vanessa's eyes lit up when she saw the invitation, recognizing the power such an association could bring, insisting to Daniel that attending could elevate their social standing, that this was the kind of circle they needed to break into. And Daniel hesitated only briefly before agreeing, curiosity gnawing at him, because the surname Mercado felt oddly familiar though he couldn't place why. And the night of the gala, the venue shimmered with understated opulence, old money elegance that spoke in whispers instead of declarations, and Elena arrived in a deep sapphire gown that flowed around her pregnant form like confidence made visible, her mother's diamond earrings catching the light as she moved through the room greeting guests who treated her with a reverence she was still learning to accept. And when Daniel and Vanessa entered, they didn't recognize her at first, not really, because people rarely see what they expect to see, and they expected a broken woman. Not a composed force of gravity holding an entire room in place, but recognition struck like lightning when Elena stepped onto the stage and introduced herself, thanking everyone for coming, speaking of her mother not as a cleaner or a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who chose dignity over domination, love over legacy. And as Elena spoke, the truth unraveled itself in real time across Daniel's face, color draining, breath hitching, realization blooming too late to be useful. And Vanessa's smile stiffened as Elena announced the foundation's endowment amount, a figure so large it rippled through the audience like a gasp. And Elena's gaze met Daniel's only once, not with accusation or bitterness, but with a calm finality that told him everything he needed to know and nothing he could change. And when the applause erupted, it felt like thunder, not celebratory but inevitable, the sound of truth settling into place. And Daniel stumbled out with Vanessa moments later, her composure shattering in the parking garage where her laughter turned to disbelief and then to panic, screaming that he had divorced a billionaire, that he had sworn Elena was nothing, that he had promised her an upgrade. And Daniel could only stand there hollow and small, realizing that the life he thought he'd escaped had been built on lies he'd told himself. And Vanessa left him that night, unwilling to attach herself to a man whose ambition had been eclipsed by his short-sightedness. And while their world collapsed in echoes and regret, Elena returned home, exhausted but peaceful, laying her hand over her belly and feeling her daughter kick strongly, alive and present and unburdened by the mistakes of others. And months later, when Elena gave birth to Rosa Elena Mercado Cruz, she held her daughter close and whispered the same promise her mother had once made without words, that she would raise her to know her worth long before the world tried to tell her otherwise. And in the years that followed, Elena transformed grief into infrastructure, funding shelters, scholarships, legal aid, and emergency housing for women caught at the intersection of loss and abandonment, never speaking publicly about Daniel or Vanessa because their relevance had expired the moment they walked away. And one morning years later, Elena stood outside a kindergarten classroom watching her daughter run inside laughing. The same building where her grandmother had once cleaned floors after hours, and Elena smiled because the circle had closed, not in revenge but in meaning, not in destruction but in creation. And she finally understood the lesson Rosa had spent her life embodying, that true wealth isn't revealed when people stay, it's revealed when they leave, because those who walk away when you are vulnerable are clearing the path for the life you were always meant to live. And Elena Cruz, once abandoned and underestimated, stood firmly in that truth, never alone, never powerless, and infinitely rich in all the ways that mattered most.